Hey, all right. We are jumping into the world of type and text here in Illustrator. Um, the difference that you're going to find about using text here in this program versus using it in Photoshop or even something like Microsoft Word, whatever, is that it's really a pretty dynamic element for using in your design. Especially in the world of print. And the reason being is that type is completely a vector element here in Illustrator. And even though in Photoshop it's part of the vector tools, it's vector based until you choose to do anything with that file. So if you save it under any format, TIFF, a JPEG, whatever, it rasterizes that text and translates that into pixels. Photoshop is incapable of maintaining that vector information unless it's just a Photoshop file, at which point it's still editable and considered vector. But that's pretty much just for while you work. You never send a printer a Photoshop file. You never upload a Photoshop file to the internet, and so on. So the biggest difference here is that type in Illustrator is a vector, just like everything else. And it's much more versatile. So while you're working with the type that you're executing, it's really easy to update it, change it, modify it, tweak it, edit, and so on, without ever losing that vector integrity. So the type tool is kind of an easy tool to find. It's a big old T. When you select it, the control bar up here, all the information is changed to be, relevant to the type tool. And the first thing we have is a fill color, a stroke color, our stroke weights. If we choose to have any variable width or brush characteristic to it, generally you don't. We have our character information, which will open up a panel for character where you have some of the same things that are next to it on the right here, your font, your style. Then we have our size, our leading, our kerning, our tracking, horizontal scale, vertical scale, baseline shift, and character rotation. At the bottom we have underline, strike through, what your anti-aliasing is, and then what language you're using. Because, you could use Estonian. I've never even looked at this before. Wow. So there's something fun to check out sometime when we're not doing this in class. So some of the same information is located here in the control bar. Just some quick stuff that you can access without having to open up another panel. We get to the paragraph. It's another panel you can open up where we have a few more options about your alignment and what sort of justification we have. And then your indents and junk about actually having control over your paragraph text. There are styles, which are graphic styles you can apply. So this is the same as going over to graphic styles here. You'll see the same thing up in that little pull down. You have opacity for your text. So two different ways to apply text in your document. The first way is just to click once. And I'm going to try to say this without being insulting. Man, I can't tell you how many times I see students, well, obviously I can't see you guys because you're somewhere else, but in class, try to click, just click, and they can't do it. They drag a little tiny box every time because they're, I don't know what they're dealing. Are they rushed? Are they impatient? Do they just not have control over, the dexterity of eye-hand coordination? Is it that people aren't used to the stylus and they can't just execute a simple tap without the stylus tip dragging across the surface of their tablet? Is it a mouse thing? I don't know. But if you can tell, it bothers me. I've seen it way too much. And just to show you what I'm talking about this. It's like they go in and they just draw a little tiny box. Oops, with the text tool. Little tiny box. And a little tiny box gives you area type, and you usually don't want little tiny boxes for area type. You should practice. That's the silliest thing I've ever heard myself say, but you should practice clicking with your mouse or your stylus and having control over that click. Don't rush yourself. Even if you're under a time constraint and a deadline's looming, you don't need to rush your click. All right, do you get my picture? I hope so. So if you just click once, you end up with a blinking cursor. This is our signal that we're all set to add some type. And type tool can produce type. One thing that you need to get used to as you create type in Illustrator is how to get out of the edit mode. And it still sounds so silly to be talking about these elementary things, but they're only elementary in my head because, I've been doing this forever, I guess. How do you get out of the edit of your text tool? There's a couple things you can do. If you hold down Command, you'll see that the bounding box pops up. Bounding box is a good signal or sign that something is going on. So you could press Command and then Return, and that gets you out of your edit. Or, I'm just going to get back in my edit mode here. You could press Command and then just click somewhere else, because what Command is doing is it's temporarily allowing you to leave the tool that you are on and use the selection tool without having to go up to the toolbar and click on it. It's a great shortcut. In fact, I don't even know if I brought this up earlier in the earlier videos. You're going to use that all the time. It's such a great, quick way to jump out of the mode that you're in temporarily, make a move, or get out of the edit mode, whatever it is you're doing, without having to go up there and click on something, do your thing, and then go back up and click on the tool that you want to stay on. So yeah, what I want you to do is get your text selected. Another way to do it would just be to go to your selection tool. As soon as you jump, if you're in the edit world and you jump to your selection tool, it just gets you out of the edit and select your object. So what I'm going to do right off the bat is make this text bigger, because I'm probably killing you with the size of the video that you're watching, and then this teeny weeny little text in there. That's just so rude of me to expect you to see this. So I'm going to go up to the control bar and I'm going to go to my size, and look at it, maxes out at 72. Well, 72 kind of works here, but what if I want to go bigger? You can just keep hitting the up arrow if you wanted to, or you can just select that value and enter something that you like. Now I'm really big. It's alright, I'm just going to leave it like that. The type tool can produce type. Alright, so how do you get into an edit? You just double click on it with your selection tool or with the type tool. At this point, you have absolute control over each character or each word. So if I wanted to start to mess with the very first option in the control bar, it would be color. I might just come over here and select the word type, and I'll go to my color for fill, and I'll make it red. How do I get out of my type edit world? Command, I almost said control. So, you know, you're in this class to get good at something, and to get good at something, you got to practice. And that might mean practicing really silly things, like getting into and out of your edit of text. The more you do it, the quicker you get at it, and the more efficient you become. And we know that efficiency is great because you can hopefully make more money down the road if you're doing design work, or you can get to bed at a decent time. Unless you're going to stay up and watch one of your favorite series like Breaking Bad. Wow, I just gave a plug for an AMC show. I should get some kickback for that. All right, so I'm just going to select my text with the selection tool. One thing that you can look at here is to see that you do have the access of both fill and stroke. And that's something that's killer. Don't have that feature in Photoshop or in Word. And I'm not even going to mention that name anymore, because the only thing you should use Microsoft Office for, or like Word, is for writing a letter. Please don't. Okay, if you finish this class, make me a promise. Don't ever use Microsoft Word to create a design. Just don't do it. It's really good for writing your boss a letter, asking for a raise, or to write your mom a letter, tell her how great you're doing in school. Write your landlords a letter, tell them that, you know, there's a dead squirrel in the pool, and it's been there for a couple weeks. Someone needs to come get it. But it's not a place to do anything like layout design. Even though they say you can do it and they give you all the tools to do it, just don't do it. Make me that promise, please. From this point on, you should be doing all of your text preparation for any design or any layout, any poster, brochure, business cards. If it involves type, do it in Illustrator. Make me that promise too. You may not understand exactly why yet, and you may have some really bad habits that are really hard to break. You love Photoshop, and you always go to Photoshop for everything because Photoshop can do everything. Well, Photoshop is great when working with pixels, but if you want the crisp, amazing clarity and flexibility when you're going to print, or even like going into video work, then you got to come here. You got to go here to Illustrator. Kind of got an attitude tonight, don't I? A little bit. I don't know. I'm getting whatever. All right, so what do we have? We have fill and stroke. So I could go to my stroke and I could say, let's put on a orange stroke. It's 1 pixel wide, so I might just go up to 4 so we can see it. So it's really nice to have that flexibility. The other thing that you'll find, oh man, this drives me nuts when you can't do that. I like to have my stroke behind my fill. The only way to do that would be to turn this into paths. I don't want to do that because we lose our editability. So there's stroke and fill working together. You could also say I don't want to fill, and you can just go with a stroke, and that would mean that the inside of your letter forms are going to be transparent, so you'll see through them. And that can be kind of a cool approach to typography. I am just going to go back to just fills because I'm not a big fan of stroke and fill in text. I find it kind of hokey. However, However, I've sure done it, and I sure have seen really good examples of it being used effectively. But just for the sake of watching it on a screen, I think it's too much information. Okay, so if you cruise through your options up here, you can change your font very easily by going to your font list and choosing, look, it's the Hollywood Hills, different fonts. I have way too many of them in here right now. I'm getting sidetracked. You don't need to find the right font for this. Just an exercise, Greg. Stop. But I have to find something that really pleases me. Well, I always loved Century Gothic. So your fonts in this list are just lists of names of fonts. But if you actually go up to the Type menu, the first option is Font, and here they give you the nice little preview of what that font will look like. Bada boom! Oh yeah, that's fun. We'll use this. We'll use this one. I like that. That is very active, very comic booky. That is a font called Bada Boom. And usually with font families, you have some styles that you can choose from, and that's the field right next to your font. But some font families are designed to not have any styles. So if I were to go back to something like Century Gothic gives me 4 options. I can do a regular, italic, bold, or bold italic. But a font that's very similar to that one, like Zurich, is going to have a whole bunch of different styles where it's extra light condensed, super condensed, extra condensed bold, and bold extended. And so some font families have just a buttload of these things, and some have none. So there's that. So if I were to get into my character palette at this point, and look at some of these other options, there's your size, and here is my leading. And what leading is the space between paragraph lines. Well, I don't have any paragraph lines. I have just one single line. This is not going to make any sort of difference here. What will make a difference is the one right below it, which is your tracking, which is the space between all of your characters. So at 0, it's the way that the font was intended to be. So a lot of times designers of typefaces take into consideration the form, the roundness, the rigidity, the angles, and all that stuff of the letters that they're making for their font family. And then they make sure that the C or the A or the N has a specific spacing around it so that it feels it's legible. We're not getting confused by symbols or anything like that. So as soon as you get into your tracking and you start opening up, you're kind of breaking away from the originally intended design and feel of your text. I should move this down here so we can see it. But there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes you really want to open up your characters. It provides air, lightness, sophistication, and in this case, not with this font that I have. It actually really kind of weakens it. This font looks best at 0. And then if you go in the negatives, you're actually pulling those letters together. A really good typographic artist or designer will start to tinker with the tracking when doing things like logo work or headline work, just to really nail a good, decent balance, or to produce a certain feel or effect. If I went to my type tool and I wanted to type in oh, let's see, what is a word I want? I want something that's like breezy. Maybe it's just summer. Sailing. Sailing. And I'm going to go pick out my old Century Gothic regular. So the word sailing looks pretty good here. What happens if I go into my tracking and I start to open it up? There's 100, there's 200. Can I actually pull off something crazy like a 600? Yes, I can. Now this guy, let's just hide you down here for the time being, get you out of the way. And let's just look at this by itself. So see what I mean about that airiness, the elegance, the sophistication. There's just something that opening up the space between letters does to our interpretation of letter design and or typography. Why didn't I just use that word instead of making one up? And as long as your characters and the word that you're using is something that's not too heavy, you know, like I wouldn't want to do this to a word that has maybe any more letters than this. Maybe like 8 letters might be your cutoff or something this big, just because it starts to get too much of a stretch. And you know, our recognition of those letter forms representing a word might just kind of stretch too far. So that's something you can do there. If you wanted to work on just individual letters, then you would highlight the letter. You'd go in there. I should move you down again, sorry. Move you down. And I'm going to go in and select my A. So maybe I'll bring it back to 0 and watch what happens. So tracking deals with this space after your letter. So if you wanted the A and the I to be closer together, then you would just adjust the tracking on the letter A, and that'll bring the I in closer. You know, now I'm starting to mess with our patterns, our rhythms, and our interpretation of this language, because now I'm starting to pair up the A and the I together. The S feels alone, ling feels like its own separate word, so it's not going to, you know, be recognized by your viewer as well. But there's times when maybe things feel too open, and you might need to tighten up a spot a little bit, or maybe it's too tight, you need to open one up because maybe an S overflows with an A, or there's lots of different times when you might need to do that. The other thing you can do is you can go to your character and jump down to horizontal scale and vertical scale. You really shouldn't mess with these. You need to put all of your trust into the designers who are behind making these font sets, these typefaces, and trust them and appreciate the work that they've done and not mess with things too much. Otherwise, you get into weak typography. Vertical and horizontal stretch are going to start to ruin that balance that was originally, initiated or designed by the type artist. But there's always a case where once in a while these things that could work in your benefit, but I advise you to stay away from those things. Baseline shift, not something to be afraid of, allows you to go above or below the baseline. The baseline is, this line that is at the bottom of all of your letters, all your characters. That's your baseline. And so going positive or negative is going to push your letter up or down off of the baseline. You've seen this used a lot, and if I were to take my S, let's see, I'm going to pull all of the tracking back maybe to like here, 200. I think I also want to make it bold. Okay, so maybe I'm going to give myself a really large S. 300. Okay, so as soon as I change the character scale of the S, that has an impact on its tracking. The tracking proportionately also scales up so that the rest of the word has been pushed away. So now I need to get in, I need to tweak with things like tracking. I need to take it back down to 0 maybe. You know, maybe 0 is enough, maybe it's not, maybe I need to go negative, maybe it needs to be a little bit above 0, but you kind of have to just feel it out. I think that what I'd like to do now is bring my S down. So that would be a baseline shift. So if I go negative, it starts to come down. Well, negative 12 isn't very much, but what if I go negative 50? Still not enough. I'm going to go negative 150. Too much. Negative 120. Getting there. 125. 30. Yeah. All right. So now I'm playing with, you know, typography. I'm thinking about the S, instead of being aligned on the same baseline as the rest of the word, that I want it to be, you know, pulled down. And, you know, if I were designing a logo that was called, well, what would I, Sail. Sail. Is that my logo? Is that my brand? Maybe it is. I'd really start messing with the spacing of these letters, the scale of them a bit, but I'd look at angles and I'd be like, well, look at the angle of the A and then the angle of this, the end stem of the S. Well, it'd be really kind of cool if this were at the same angle as the A, and I could tuck the A in even a little bit closer, or maybe even make it smaller, or bring it down a little bit, and have it so that it kind of like rides off of these lines that the S is making. That could be kind of cool. Can't do that while it's still editable, and we'll get to a point in a little bit where we can take the characters of any text and turn it into a path. So maybe what I'll do is I'll just save this for later. I'll just leave it peeking out at me just to remind me, don't forget about the logo. Okay, so the other thing you can do is you can play with your, I should bring it down, I keep doing that, your character rotation. So character rotation will allow you to rotate your individual letters, if that's what you want to do, or you can do it all. So now what I've done is I've rotated each letter 45 degrees, and that has an impact on the tracking. So I'd want to compensate for that and try to bring them back together. Closer. Well, it's a negative 500 like. That's better. All right, so you'll see that, you know, you can lean your type, which is kind of cool. It does it all per character. I'm going to bring it back to normal. So those are the things you're going to find in the character panel. At this point, paragraph, all I can really do is say, do I want it aligned to the right, do I want it aligned center, or do I want it aligned to the left, which I just set those backwards. You know, if I wanted this type to be centered in a document, I should have it live as a centered text. And since I wrote it with the whatever, you know, I clicked over here from my cursor and it wrote it aligned left, and then you change it, it basically bases the center on where you first had your first click. So I'd have to move it and bring it back in towards the middle of my document. I'm going to shorten this. I'm just going to say type tool can. The type tool can. That's pretty fun. Alright, so notice that we have transform handles. Transform handles allow you to grab corners and do scale. So if I wanted to scale this up, I could hold down Shift and keep it in proportion. I could also, while holding down Shift, press down Option, and I'll scale it from the center outwards, which is a nice way to do that. And while I'm doing that, I could also press my, nope, wrong program. I won't even tell you what I was going to do. Anyways, what's happening, as soon as I let go, it has changed the point size of my type, and that's awesome. That's part of that relationship of vector text and Illustrator here. If I were to start to stretch it, and I go into my character palette, you'll see that my horizontal scale has been decreased. So I'm now at 70%. That is because I stretched it. So any transform that you do to type, it keeps it in the world of the character. So it's something that you can always go back and just set to 100 if you wanted to. Well, it got bigger, didn't it? I think I was at 180. Close enough. So there's that. The other thing that you can do is if you cruise all the way across your control bar and look at this last little button, you've got make an envelope with a mesh or a warp, and we're just going to do a warp first. If you leave it unchecked on a warp and then click the button, it says, okay, you want to warp it. What do you want? Do you want an arc? You might be like, I don't know, what does it look like? So you got to click preview. You go, oh, an arc. Well, that's cool. You can decrease the arc by lowering the bend percentage. You could go the opposite direction, so you could bend it under. And these are kind of nice. It's basically using an interface to get your text to appear different. But maybe instead I want to do something like, oh, I don't know, a flag. And then you have your vertical and horizontal distortion, so you could get this kind of interesting almost perspective coming out. And before you go, man, that's cool, just ask yourself, how often do you see successful typography use these things? Not too often, but it's been done. So just make sure you're serving your purpose when you use these things. There's a lot of really bad ones in there. If you ever commit to this and you want to edit your text, you have to double click on it, and it takes you into an edit just like groups do. So if I look at the top of my window, having applied a warp and then double clicking on it, it took me into an edit of the envelope, at which point now I can double click and I could select typo letter and change it, and it'll automatically update itself in the mesh warp. But I need to get out of this if I want to go back and continue work on the rest of my design. So that's when you just have to remember that you click on the arrow to get all the way back, or you can simply use the selection tool and double click somewhere not on your artwork, and it'll pull you back too. I'm just going to undo and get rid of that warp. So that's pretty sweet, right? Right. I'm going to wrap this video up. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about some other type options.